Hello, everyone. My name is Mark. Welcome to Mark's Remarks. Today, I'm going to read a review for a book of poetry by Savannah Brown called Sweetdark. I hope you guys enjoy. I ran across Savannah on some random playlist of YouTube videos about introspection and creativity. I loved the cadences of her low voice and her admixture of confidence and self-doubt, that combination unique to but common among us poets. I found out that she had some poetry self-published and some novels published by Penguin Random House. Publishers aren't by any means perfect gatekeepers, but they do help sift a lot of the worst offenders out, even if they tend toward homogenization, especially in poetry. This was probably the best thing about this poetry. It doesn't just sound like every other MFA Poetry Foundation poet. Those are impressive to read, but they feel like such an obvious pose, such a calculated rebellion. Savannah refreshingly lacked so much of that. Despite that lack, she fell into her own unique pitfall. I guess we all do, so can I really fault her? I noticed that this text would have benefited from an editor. I don't mean that it was sloppy, except for that one time when she accidentally wrote with only with my body on page 12. I meant that it felt like she went as far as she could take the poetry on her own. Let me zoom out. Savannah explained on in a National Poetry Day video about how to write spoken word poetry, um, that she advised to think about a topic first, brainstorm words around it, then free write and explore how you can turn that into a poem. On one important level, this helps the poem to have directionality. Without explicitly stating the theme or topic, you risk possibly becoming Weldon Keys, spouting randomness for randomness' sake. But starting with an explicit theme or focus also severely limits the poem's potentiality. In other words, it's hard to be surprised by your own poem when you've already mapped it out. This is the strength of Stephen King's writing, that he's surprised as much as the audience is by the various plot twists. The problem with this approach is that it's hard to figure out how to dismount, how to end it, how to cap it convincingly. Hard baked into Brown's definition of poetry is spoken word. Her poetry is intended to be read aloud, much as mine is. However, hers is an aural in the sense of hers is aural in the sense of having narrative momentum, whereas mine is often lacking in straightforward narrative, instead being driven onward by the force of the vocabulary itself. I could hear her reading it when I read these poems in my head, but I fear that these poems didn't work as well without her voice, especially without her cadence and interpretation of them. The nice thing about reading aloud to an audience is that it washes over them. They have to grab what few lines they can remember. It's more of an experience than something easily analyzed. In the case of written poetry, you can play with the visual aspect. You can play with the shape of the words and the letters like I do. You can do a lot more. You also are limited by the need to make things more self-contained. If you're reading Savannah's poetry and get interrupted, you basically have to restart to enjoy it. If you try picking up where you left off, it's sometimes pretty rough. This isn't to say her transitions suck, but for her, momentum is a must. However, even if you read it aloud as she intended, the species of momentum still is interrupted by a tone change about halfway to two-thirds of the way through each poem. Like any good late millennial or proto-Gen Z, we fear being sincere for too long, and we always undercut things with nervous laughter, with irony, or with some jokey attempt at admitting that, yes, I understand this is poetry and I'm taking your precious time, so please have mercy on me. The problem is that she does this in almost every single poem. You could nearly set your watch to it. If Savannah ever reads this, or hears this, I want her to know that she can be bold, that the true rebellion is being unabashedly sincere, as stupid as that sounds. Who knows? Maybe she changes this trend by her later poetry. She wrote this by now 5 years ago, and I don't know how much better my poetry would have been at this stage, probably worse. Time is a very strange thing. She talks about it a lot in her poetry. She's playful in it, but in a smiling through the pain, nihilist in recovery sort of way that I could only now start to relate to. She's unsure of a lot of things, like I'm starting to be. It's strange the rates at which we mature, both personally and in our craft. Savannah and I nearly share a birthday. If my mom would have waited a couple hours, we would have shared the exact same day. I really like her videos, probably more than her poetry. She seems to shine the most in prose, especially in essays. Her poetry isn't bad by any means, but it's always tugging at its clothes like a kid dressed up formally for the first time. While exploring Savannah's backstory, I also discovered she has a hater, one random kid who made a really ugly and sad hate video a couple of years back. I'm not here to defend Savannah from this guy, mostly because she doesn't need defending. If you're going to attack someone for being vapid and superficial, your attack should itself rise above the level of vapid and superficial. If you can't manage a competent comparison, you might just be projecting your own insecurities. If you're going to roast someone, you better know how to make a fire, otherwise you might get food poisoning from your own undercooked hubris. My criticism of Savannah is tempered by respect. She has some genuinely gorgeous lines, like, ribbity girl libs pinned for a little lifetime to the sandbar, your fresh reality, that angry lunar rush crushed chest, your spasming lungs, tongue brine, sour, young panic. And like unearthing a plot of ox eyes and June bugs with a toothy grab crane, but I can't pull myself from what makes me a clever animal. But like another reviewer remarked, sometimes it feels calculated in her own way. What with all these adjectives and $5 thesaurus words, specific bugs and birds and plants. There's a long tradition of such specificity in poetry, don't get me wrong, but without a guide, writings from the likes of H.D. and Wallace Stevens become incomprehensible to the unlettered reader. At times, I'd echo the worry of that other reviewer, that these literally flowery bouts of language cover up a fear of not sounding poetic enough, not saying profound enough things. The problem with this worry is that it deadens the artistry. I'm not saying you have to do it this way, but my approach to poetry is totally the opposite of Savannah's. I never know where my poems will start or end. I might have something on my mind, but it's always on the subconscious level. In my opinion, poetry is something which emerges most purely in the border between conscious and unconscious. My definition, by definition, it's a liminal thing, always teetering on the edge of annihilation by either becoming too rational and linear, prose, or too esoteric, solipsism. Every time I write a good poem, I'm able to surprise myself, and it's not until days or months or even years later that I fully understand what I was talking about in some of these poems. Sometimes Savannah seems plagued by understanding too much. The nice thing about such a problem is that any skill you learn can be unlearned, any habit can be reversed. Paradoxically, really dense poetry is both a great starting place and a great byproduct of such unlearning. Thanks for watching. Please do not like or subscribe. We'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.